Hello, Rachael Johns.
Hi, Sophie Green.
At the time we are recording this, we actually just recorded an episode yesterday with
Yeah, long time no see.
Exactly, long time no see, but also nothing new to report apart from the fact I've been scrabbling around in the dirt pulling out weeds at a bush block. That's my big news. I am intrigued by the earrings you are wearing.
Oh, these are little typewriters. So I'm showing the people who are watching on YouTube, but for those who are not watching on YouTube, I'll describe them. They're little red typewriters, and the paper piece at the top says "Born to Tell Stories." You know, I do have a bit of an earring addiction, and these are from Callie Peters, who I follow on Instagram. She does great cat earrings too, but she did books and writing one a few months ago, so I had to get these typewriters.
Earring addiction, or is we call it an addiction or just a preference?
Well, I think it's an addiction because I need to stop because I've got too many and I don't have enough days to wear them all anyway. But sometimes, so I'm a bit better. I'm a bit better at buying earrings than I am at buying books, in that I can restrain myself.
Mm.
This morning I've already bought like 4 books online. That's how bad I am.
Okay. Well, or like print books or ebooks?
Print books, actually. Yeah. One's another craft book, Sophie. For those who are listening to us, you all have heard that a few. I don't know how I've stumbled across this. It's about it's all about tropes. And it's the first in a 4-book series. I thought don't buy it, Rach, but then I downloaded the sample and had a scan through that, and I was like, yeah, I do like it. So
Okay.
hopefully the rest is just as good. And then I also bought, I'm glad we're talking, you can tell us in a moment who we're talking to, but I've been reading this book, The Simple Wild. I'm holding it up for those who can see, by K.A. Tucker. So I was going to write this morning, but I've basically just faffed around buying books and reading books instead. But, even Stephen King, because I was dipping back into this, says on writing that you're allowed 1 day off a week.
Well, that raises a question. Do you actually take days off, or do you just normally write 7 days a week?
I don't write 7 days a week. And I'll tell you about The Simple Wild and why I mentioned that sec. I don't write 7 days a week. I definitely write 5 days a week. In terms of, like, I treat it as my Monday to Friday job. I need a day.
Sunday that we're talking. So
yeah, exactly. As I was saying, so I need at least a day for just like house stuff and relax. Well, not really relaxing. I was joking to my husband. My Saturday is my day off. He has a Saturday off too, and it's like cleaning, doing the grocery shopping, boring stuff. So it's not really a day off. And then Sunday I'm a little kinder to myself. But as I'm heading into writing a book, like I'm in the beginnings of the first draft, and I'm really wanting to immerse myself in it. And also I'm aware that the next few months are pretty busy, and I have a quite tight deadline. I am, in theory, going to try and write on Sundays as well. But sometimes I begrudge writing on Sundays. But I was just, because I'm like, I want to just relax. But I was saying, in reading the Stephen King on writing memoir again, just flicking through it, I was flicking through things that I'd highlighted earlier. He comes across that point again that I think I mentioned when we were talking about the craft books, that literally only you should only take 3 months to write a book. But that is him writing 6 days a week. He believes that, to be fully immersed in the story, you shouldn't take more than a day off. Anyway, we've probably got to go.
I also want to make the point that he probably had his wife running his household for him, so that
he mentions that. He says that he does mention that. But yeah, today I think we're talking to someone to do with TikTok. Is that right?
We are. My colleague Claudia, who is the TikTok expert and the BookTok expert, so she's in the waiting room.
Oh, excellent! So I've been reading A Simple Wild, which is a TikTok book, so I want to talk to her. Anyway, let's bring her in then.
We will let her in, and she can tell us all about the world of TikTok. I'm going to put us on hold. So, Rachel, our guest today is my colleague Claudia. Hello, Claudia.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to do this. Sorry, Rachel, I talked all over the top of you.
No, that's okay. I was just saying hello.
So Claudia is in our marketing team, and I don't know if you want to give your exact title, Claudia, but if you would like to, go right ahead.
I am the campaign executive in the marketing team at Hachette Australia.
Sounds very fancy.
It's so fancy. It's far more fancy than it sounds.
Well, except you do fancy work as someone who witnesses it close hand. And also on TikTok, you are Claudia Talks Film. So that's a little misleading in that it's got film in your handle and you are, in fact, a book expert. But before we started recording this, Rach, you said something about how you remembered when Claudia got the job. So how did that enter?
I think I did. But then I just quickly checked and I'm not following. So I don't know how that happened because I was definitely following you. So I'm now following you again. Not that I'm on TikTok ever really anymore, but yeah, I remember following you as a BookToker or / film talker. Okay, I know both, so I would have followed you for the books. And then I do remember either you saying you got the job or I remember seeing you appear on the Hachette TikTok account and talking about like day in the life of, so I made the connection there.
Yes, I think I had like one video on my own page. It was like, I'm moving to Sydney, everyone. I've gotten a job in publishing. And then so maybe you saw that and then I just popped up on Hachette.
Okay, so did you move for the job? Wow.
I did. Yeah, I was in Melbourne and then moved to Sydney for the job.
Okay, cool.
And hopefully you haven't regretted that move.
No, haven't regretted it yet. So
just letting Addie in, sorry.
So that Addie is Rachel's dog. It's not a child.
My terrible outfit, yeah.
Look,
oh,
it's
so cute.
My compression socks and my.
Well, they look like fashion socks, not compression
Well,
socks.
I love I find that, yeah, anyway, we don't need to talk about my compression socks, but let's go.
Because Claudia, she wears them because she's sitting to write a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all for a good pair of socks. So
Oh.
I think you can't do
very
anything.
comfy.
And I'm wearing the socks that I had in my boots in bush care because I just forgot to take them off. So if I start perspiring, it's because I'm getting very warm in my woolen socks. But we're not here to talk about socks. We're here to talk about BookTok in particular, on TikTok in general, because the reason why we wanted to invite you on, Claudia, is because BookTok is a feature, not a bug, as I like to phrase it. It's not going anywhere. I think initially some people might have thought it was an anomaly in terms of readers' behavior, that maybe it was just a pandemic generated thing where everyone was on social media a lot and then picking up recommendations from BookTok, from TikTok in particular. So I was wondering if you could tell us, in your definition, what is BookTok?
BookTok for me is a community where people talk about books they're reading and a way to connect with people who read, because I find in my own life I don't have many people who actually read the same books as I do, so it always kind of stemmed from that finding a community to talk about what you're reading. That is BookTok to me. It's not specific to a certain type of book, it is just a place where you can talk about books.
So when you started making book-related content on TikTok, was it, or actually, what came first? Did you actually watch people making it, or did you just start talking about books, or was it at the same time?
So it was during COVID, so obviously spending lots of time on TikTok, and I just stumbled across a couple people talking about books. It was always the same couple books, the Sarah J. Maas, the Song of Achilles at the time. And I was like, oh my God, like I used to love reading. Why had I stopped reading? I'm just gonna buy the book that they talk about and see if I like it. It was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And then I ended up loving it, but having no one to talk to about it in my own life. So then I just started posting my reactions to reading it on TikTok.
Okay.
Is that why, sorry, that's the question, is that why it's Claudia Talks Film? Did you start in the film, like?
No, I called it Claudia Talks Film because I didn't want people to find me on TikTok.
So I think people you know.
Yeah, so I figured if they were looking up, Claudia books, odds are I'd come up. But like, I was like,
hilarious.
they won't be able to find me because my account's Claudia Talks Film. Like, it's misleading. And then it kind of just
feel,
like.
How do you feel if people find you now?
It's fine now. It's like it doesn't, because like I've got followers now, so it's not as obvious, and people don't bring it up to me as much anymore. But it was purely just because I didn't want people to see me posting on the internet.
No, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. And as authors, we're getting told to do a lot more video and stuff, and some of us don't mind. I don't mind being in front of the video, but it's just the time it takes to do all that kind of stuff. But I guess it's the same. Not everyone is comfortable with that at first, but then once you do it after a while, you just kind of, it's like writing sex scenes, to be honest. I think like at first it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want anyone I know to read this, blah blah, and then after a while you're like, oh, whatever.
Well, and as the author, I suppose you have to be findable online, so you can't have a
Yeah.
misleading name, as your name is your brand in a sense. So like you
Although
have to be able to be found.
Yeah, true. Although we have had discussions about social media and, as authors, whether social media sells books. So, I mean, I'm sure Sophie's got lots of questions for you, but yeah, I'd love to,
Well, I think that is, again, we go where the conversation goes. So, Claudia, if you actually want to address that, whether you believe social media, but obviously in your case,
authors on TikTok.
you bought Akatar as a result of seeing it on TikTok, and certainly I think we can see the direct impact of BookTok on specific titles and in specific genres. So maybe
it wasn't Sarah J. Maas that was
No.
on TikTok promoting her book.
That's right.
What I like, So yeah, like how do you feel about authors on TikTok?
I think now is a much easier time and better time for authors to be on TikTok compared to what BookTok was a few years ago, because it's become, I suppose, more niche and yet somehow less niche. So like an author can post about not just their own books, but about everything, like the writing process, and like there are various hooks I think an author can talk about to still be interesting, as opposed to just recommending a book, which is solely what like I do and what people like me do. So it's like you have a different perspective. But I suppose there's kind of a fine line between pushing your book down someone's throat and being like, this is just something that I wrote and put lots of time into. Please support me. I think that's a better angle than just being like, this is my really cool book that you'll love. It's like you don't want to tell people will love it, because odds are they won't love it. But if they if they get invested and they're kind of willing to support you along your journey, I think that's a better way to go in it. So kind of becoming a more personable face, because you come across so many books in a bookstore, but like how rare can you be like, oh my god, I know who that is.
True.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose TikTok is a good vehicle if an author feels like it, to be like, oh no, that's me. Like I know them from that TikTok, or I know them from that video. So yeah, I don't think
true. We love seeing people we know's books on, so there's that,
yeah, it's that sense of familiarity, and I think TikTok has done that really, really well, I think, for the book space, and that's translated through all sorts of book related content on the app.
Can I ask?
Sorry, go on. You go, Rach.
You go first. I've written mine down.
Okay. But it is hard to know for writers, I think, what they can offer that's different to what's already out there. Apart from obviously they are different themselves, but I have made TikTok content as a writer. I've looked at various things. I will often make different TikTok content than what I put on other social media platforms. But then I often think, well, there's just so much out there about writing in particular.
Yeah.
There's so many book recommendation videos out there. What could I possibly offer that's different on TikTok? So it's the push and pull, I would imagine, for writers on that platform in particular, because on Instagram, Facebook, that is about attaching to you personally, but on TikTok, it's very much about what is the hook, what's going to make people watch you. So I can totally understand why some writers just think this is all too hard, and I'm not near it.
Well, and it's also time consuming.
Yes.
And you have to spend a lot of time on the app to be good at the app and kind of getting to know how to pitch yourself. Like the way I speak on TikTok is not how I actually speak in real life. I think I put on a slightly bit of a more positive note, because it's just like what happens when I'm in front of a camera. So like I kind of get that. It's overwhelming, I think. And I think, just because you might have a good content idea, you still need to create that content well and kind of create it in a way that still looks good. Otherwise people will just scroll past you.
I think that's my issue. Like, the time factor it's so, and I'm not really great with the all the editing and making things look fancy and flash. It was like in the Instagram days, with the pretty flat lays and stuff was never me. I'm just like a hot mess on everything. But it's interesting that you talk about like the writing process, Sophie, and how there is so much out there. And I feel like, I think we've talked about this before when we were talking, I don't know which podcast, but in that targeting, there's like authors on TikTok, authors on social media targeting authors, and then there's authors on social media targeting readers, and then there's authors, as you said, on social media as readers. Like we're all readers, so I read heaps and can recommend those sorts of books. But do readers really want to know, like the majority of readers, and this might be hard because obviously you work in publishing, you're a diehard reader, but you've had a lot of interactions with others. Do they care about the writing process and behind the scenes? Like, is that what they do want to see rather,
Yes and no. I think that it depends on kind of how much, like how well known that author becomes. So I think it's harder if you don't have that familiarity to start creating that content, because people won't know you and therefore they're not invested in your writing process. But for a bigger author or a more familiar author, they'll be like, oh, okay. And maybe it's not writing process specifically, but it's more like, oh, we pulled a quote from this book, like this is why I put this line in, or like, this is the
Yeah.
development of that line, this is a development of the cover, I wanted the cover to look like this.
Yeah,
Because
behind
then
the scenes stuff, not necessarily
Yes.
how to write stuff.
Yes, and
Yeah.
because I'm not a writer, so I'm not on, say, BookTok, so I'm not as
Yeah.
familiar with what sort of content is being churned out from them. But if I was following an author, I'd be more interested to see the specifics of how they've developed their book and how they have impacted that release.
That's good. That's interesting. Yeah.
One thing you said, Claudia, that I find really interesting is that BookTok essentially made you get back into reading. Well, not made you. It led you back into reading, which is a phenomenal impact, really. So for everyone who wants to, everyone who might think that social media can be evil and TikTok perhaps is evil, that is a good, actually, that you came back to reading through it.
Well, yes. And it wasn't just like lots of people as well, because it was mainly the combination of lockdown, having so much free time, not knowing what to do with all that time, and then finding just these people who seemed genuinely happy to talk about something again. And it was like, oh, like, look how happy they are. I was that happy person years ago, but then, you know, life got in the way, uni, study, work, but I had time again. So I had time to find something I enjoyed and engage with it in a different way than I was when I was younger. TikTok didn't exist then.
I love book, like as I said, I'm not on there a lot at the moment simply because it's a time factor thing, but I have seen the effect, as we all have, books, the BookTok in the book world, like in publishing. It's negative and positive. The negative, I guess, as we've talked about before, is particularly for Australian authors, is a lot of the books that are big on BookTok are mostly overseas books. It's very hard for Australian published books to get sort of up there and to become viral or cause hype. So obviously the shelf space in Australia is going oftentimes now to overseas authors, and it's taking away in some ways space. I know people who haven't got into Target and Kmart and stuff because, you know, they're taking books that are popular on BookTok and stuff instead. But the flip side of that, which I'm really excited about, is the amount of people that have just excited about reading, and particularly romance, in terms of, it used to be such a, I don't read romance or write romance, or it's a bit of like a guilty pleasure or whatever. I love on BookTok that people are proud of what they read. They don't care. They're not going to be shamed. And that we're finally, because of BookTok, seeing romance elevated in other like bookshops, festivals, and all that. So yeah, I think it's wonderful that it's brought lots of people to reading, and I'd rather people be reading something than they're not reading. So, you know, even if they're not reading as much Australian fiction as I like, I hope that will, you know, will come. And also, I think I know a publisher that I spoke to around the BookTok time, beginning, sort of not the beginning, but the time when everyone sort of went, oh, hang on, this is something that's actually, you know, having a big effect. She was worried that, you know, all the books that are being read are, you know, all the young, sexy sort of dark romance tropes and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but eventually everyone's reading tastes change, and just hopefully these people, not that I'm shaming any of those reading tastes, it's great, but hopefully these people will be readers for life now. And, you know, that means they'll eventually experiment with other books as well, hopefully.
I do agree. Like, I think BookTok is a good starting point for anyone wanting to read and finding what you want to read and continue on reading. But there's only so much you can get from BookTok. Like, it's kind of becomes onto the reader to figure out what they want to read and look for those books outside of it, I suppose.
And I think that's where the other parts of your job come in, really, because part of your job is helping people discover other books they may wish to read. And I think it's a challenge, hopefully a good challenge for publishers in general and for authors, to think about how we connect with readers who are reading perhaps for the first time ever, or reading enthusiastically for the first time by discovering books through BookTok, and then how you lead them to other things. And it's not a challenge I'm sure we're quite on top of yet, apart from just telling people about books as best we can.
That is one of the core things that I try to do, I suppose, trying to figure out to take the reader away from TikTok, especially in the advent that TikTok collapses or something goes wrong, and then that those readers, where will they get their books from? Like, we don't want them to stop reading because their main platform of interaction is gone. So it becomes a matter of trying to get them off TikTok onto other platforms or giving them content that they feel they can, well, I suppose becoming a source where they know that they can get book recommendations from outside of it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's specifically to the job. It's like making sure Hachette is a bit more familiar to them. Like understanding that, yes, Hachette published all these books you're really interested in, Hachette, so that they kind of like, oh, okay, that's somewhere to go. And I think that's kind of a lot of publisher strategies. It's kind of like, it's growing brand awareness basically in the advent that your community is gone. So you can still capture them in another way.
But publishers used to be so averse to creating brand awareness. I remember talking about this years ago when I was an agent, and everyone was really focused on Penguin. As a friend of mine pointed out, Penguin is a design-led brand, and that's how people recognize it, by the design of the logo, essentially. But
I love that little penguin.
And Rachel is published by Penguin Random House, I should say, but it's, and then so there was this sort of this like envy of the brand of Penguin, but then a complete reluctance to actually develop a brand as a different publishing company, which is now changing, possibly because the tools are there through social media to do it.
And people like merch, I think, as well. You know, people love, I think on BookTok and stuff. I mean, I'm loving all the prettier editions of books we're coming out. I mean, I know we're a smaller market in Australia, so it's harder. A lot of the indie publishers are actually doing some beautiful special editions, which I know are very popular, but it's still like, if you want to get a beautiful hardback, often you have to order from overseas. You know, I love that Dimmix is doing a few of some of the big name books and that, but people really love them. As I think I said yesterday, though, it's hard because we're like against climate change and clutter and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time, people do love showing their stuff, having a nice collection of pretty books and merch stuff. So I think, yeah, Penguin has got on board that and is like, we're going to really, like, I actually know that they're leaning more into their brand than you know, before. For a while. Even some of the publishers that I spoke to, you know, years ago, they didn't necessarily want the little penguin on their imprint. And I was like, why not? I mean, part of the appeal of going to Penguin, there was a lot of, you know, me changing publishers had a whole load of, you know, I respect and love my old publisher Harper as well. But part of the appeal was so that I could have that cute little penguin on the book.
Design-led brand, like that's I think it's that's part of Claudia. What we haven't done yet is actually talk about what your day-to-day is like, and so will be people who are interested to find out what you do within the marketing team at Hachette.
So my day-to-day at work.
Yeah, sorry, no, not you get ready with me. No.
Yeah, like, get ready, spend the day with me.
Well, I'd be interested in that too.
Well, I only ever film those videos when there's a lot happening on the day. Otherwise, like, the majority of the day is spent answering emails or
I know. I think the same when people want author day in the life. I'm like, really? It's not very exciting.
Well, yes, but then this is the issue with TikTok. Everything has to be exciting. So I wait till there's like quite a few things, like an author visit or something cool I can jump on, or like I'm packing a box. But so stay my day-to-day, get to work. Like, I'm logged into all our social accounts on my phone, so I do check notifications from overnight. I'm a bit of an addict, so I check it quite often. I run our romance community, the Bookish Type, which takes up quite a bit of time managing it, as I interact with everyone that interacts with posts there. They are very relentless. I love them. They send lots of messages.
The Bookish Type, what is that on a platform, or is that?
It's on Instagram.
Okay, yeah.
So, and it consists
I might be following you, I don't know, but
I will follow away.
I probably am.
Some recommendations for Hachette titles.
Yeah.
But so I take all the photos, schedule it, captions, and I really love it. It's kind of how I can take a bit of what I do on TikTok and apply it to work. I get to kind of create my own community, which is very exciting. Then emails.
I am following you.
Lots of emails. Then scheduling social posts, setting up ads for our titles. I work a lot on the romance titles, the young adult fantasy titles, a lot of genre-based titles. I enjoy it because, again, I think it's what I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
But sometimes there'll be an author I get to communicate with, whether that be like I need to source materials for something or send them stuff to approve, which is a really rewarding part of the job. Lunch, crucial. And then if I have time, I'll try film like a TikTok or something for work, or I sit down with Sophie and we film an impromptu TikTok.
I'm quite good. It's like, hey Claudia, why don't we do X, Y, Z?
And then it sits on my phone until I have time to edit it, because again, editing is the most time consuming part of creating video content. Filming it is fine, it doesn't take long at all, but editing takes so long. So I try and do it usually on my way home or something, because I can do it on the move. So I feel less guilty just sitting at my desk editing videos.
You shouldn't feel guilty because it's your work.
Yeah,
exactly.
but I feel like because it's so like stationary and I have to look at my phone, because I edit all on my phone. I don't edit on like an external platform.
Rach would say that I don't actually ever edit my TikTok videos. I just like film it and go, whoops, off it goes.
That's because you're good at filming everything in one take. I can't do a one take.
Yeah,
I'm not a
good
one
at
take
that
wonder.
either. No, either am I.
No, it's so hard. Like I'm like sentence by sentence, and then I have to edit out all the. I don't like dead space because I find it boring, so I edit out all the dead space in my TikTok, so it's fast. But I do
that would take time, because if anyone who's trying to edit in that TikTok app, it's extremely fiddly.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah,
like a cut a half a second here, half a second there.
Yeah, you're 100% right that's the time-consuming thing. I think the two things for me are coming up with ideas and the editing, the actual filming. Like as I said, I feel quite comfortable filming stuff. I'm not like worried about that. But yeah, it's all the other things involved.
It's so hard. Like, and then I caption all my videos. So I have to go through all the captions to make sure it's correct.
Yes.
I add pictures of book covers. So I have to go download the book cover, add it to TikTok, resize it. It's just time consuming. But that's fine. So then that's, I suppose, the majority of my day. It's lots of online stuff, I suppose.
So the social media accounts, are you, just so people understand how much time is spent perhaps out of office hours, it sounds like you're looking at those outside of hours.
I do, yes, but it's also, I have an addiction and I need to stop. I always check it. I'm like, oh, I wonder what someone's tagged us in. I wonder what's happened. Like, oh no, I missed something. I have to reshare it. Like I'll tag someone. I try and reshare lots of content people tag us in on the Bookish type, which happens at all hours of the day. So I'm kind of, whenever I go in, I'm like, oh, reshare. But I enjoy it. So like, even though I'm like an addict.
But so many people, like 100%, like social media has made workaholics even more of workaholics. Because you can be literally replying to things, resharing things constantly. And as an author, that's why it's important, I guess, to work out, where to spend your time.
Yes.
Because, how much of that replying and all that sort of stuff is important over actually writing the next book. Can I ask a quick question, Ree? You mentioned you work more in like the fantasy, the YA fantasy, romance, the genre sort of stuff, and that made me think about like certain platforms. Like, do you think TikTok is really the place for literary fiction, or like what's who are the readers really that are on like there? If you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I always kind of say, because it's been a bit more of a discussion recently about where we can pitch books. And the thing with BookTok is like, it's so niche. So like if you are after literary fiction, you can find it on the app. You just have to kind of search it and maybe follow a few creators.
Like that.
Yes. Yeah. You might have to go initially to a little bit of work to find what you're after. But once you kind of figure out where the people are talking about stuff, then you'll get served content. And that kind of applies to any genre on any topic. So like, say you've got a nonfiction book coming out that you think is an interesting topic. There are people who will engage with that content. It might just be a little bit harder to find them, and they might not already be on BookTok. Yes. So you're kind of relying on your own content and the hooks of your content to find those readers, as opposed to finding them within BookTok, but they're all
that
there.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But BookTok will always, I always think of it as, books that elicit big emotions. Yeah. So your romance, your fantasy, your epics, like your sad literary fictions, like A Little Life was obviously huge. Anything that can kind of create a response, I think, is the most popular on BookTok. And I think that's consistent throughout the entire time I've been on the apps.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, and there's always readers, but they're just a bit harder to find sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you said the books that have a big emotional response, but also I guess that comes down to how the BookTokers are talking about those books. Yeah. So obviously they're focusing on conveying the emotional experience of reading that book, as opposed to, oh, here is a précis of the storyline.
Yeah. You definitely see that more, don't you?
That's exactly it.
That's the thing, like as writers, and as I said, I'm just trying to think, like, because we've got a lot of writer listeners too, as well as readers, and the readers, I can see kind of what they want and that on TikTok, but should writers sort of be leaning into then, rather than explaining the plot of the book, saying how this book will make you feel or how it made me feel while I'm writing it, and what, all that kind of.
I would say yes. I see those videos from authors and I engage with them because they're, they're a simple hook. I don't have to think too hard. And then I leave the video knowing exactly what I was seeing. Whereas like things like even say if I were to post a book review, it doesn't do very well. If I post like a quote from a book, that does much better, because people, it's a combination of they don't have the capacity, they don't care, they just want to know how they'll feel reading it. So I think that is probably how authors can kind of use the platform to best suit
that's
their
such
purposes.
good advice. Yeah.
So in creating the bookish type, because it sounds like you created that from scratch, so that's you being able to understand who a readership is and then create content around it. Are you thinking along those lines of which books are we going to talk about? I know that there are certain books on the list you need to talk about because we're publishing them, but are you thinking out which books are going to fit best with this readership? So which books can we talk about that are going to have that emotional response for the reader? So we're going to focus on those and then crafting the content around it accordingly.
Yeah. So with Bookish Tribe, I suppose it also becomes a place to highlight our romance books that potentially don't get as much eyes on them. So it becomes and then so say I would pair a more unfamiliar book with a popular book because people know the popular book, and then they'll be like, oh, but there's also this book. And
so
so
they
TikTok,
love that one, then they're
so it's kind of, but the tone is very casual. If you do cast a glance over it, my captions are very informal, because I want it to come across as if I'm also someone who loves these books, as opposed to someone who works for the publisher, because I do like it is the books I read, it's what I enjoy.
And
so
people aren't stupid, are they? Like that's the thing, I think, like when you're manipulating people to try and read something, they're gonna put up a wall kind of thing, and not, it really has to be organic and like real.
And that's I suppose the power of, say, TikTok influencing other aspects of the job. Like TikTok is very community based, it's informal, this is something I love that you might love as well. And I kind of take that approach in a lot of what I do for marketing those kind of romance books, because it's the same thing. It's like, this is how it could make you feel, this is why you should read it. Trust me. I'm asking you to trust me.
Has there ever been a book that you've read that you've discovered on TikTok that is actually not the sort of book you thought you would ever read, but someone's made a video that's been so persuasive, you're like, okay, I'm totally going to give that a go?
Oh, always. The majority of what I read by the app, I'm like, oh, I probably won't even enjoy this, but I'll try it anyway. But the most recent, I read Dolly Alderton's Everything I Know About Love. I'm not a nonfiction person, but I saw a couple TikToks and I was like, oh, I'll give it a go, and I actually really enjoyed it. But I would say I still pick up books that I might not like. They're still within genres I tend to read. Because I'm curious. It's about a curiosity, and then it becomes how easy it is to access that book once my curiosity has been piqued.
That's true. And that's a good point, actually, because being on social media too much sometimes than I should be, but like I'll come across something that is not easy to find in Australia. Like this happened to me last night. It was a Christmas crime romance. Recommend that. Tell you about that later, Sophie. That's one of the ones I bought today online. Before we started, Claudia, I said to Sophie that I've already bought like 4 books today. Just I was supposed to be writing, but instead I'm, and it was literally, I looked at Dimmix, I looked at QBD, they didn't have it. It's not coming out like till after Christmas, it seems, in Australia. Anyway, so I had to
indent titles, that's what that means.
I had to order it from Amazon, but because literally I couldn't get anywhere, and I was like, I need to have it, and I didn't want to have the ebook for some reason, and that wasn't coming out till January either. That's right, otherwise maybe I would have. And so that's I think one of the frustrating things sometimes for me as an Australian, but also I find when you are when you are published predominantly in Australia, so like Sophie and I, and it's probably the flip side is that people that are seeing your book, say in America or England or other countries, might feel that frustration of not being able to find an actual easily be able to buy it. I don't know. That's the problem with global marketing, I think. Global social marketing.
The problem with TikTok.
Who are some of your, for me, when we're talking about the hard it is to be organic and just the authors that are doing well, like for me immediately one of my favorites that comes to mind as an author, as a TikToker, not necessarily as an author, or I do like some of her books, is Tessa Bailey, right? She is so good at the little skits she's done. Also in Australia, Stacey McEwen, who they're just hilarious. They are not about buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. They are really funny, sometimes about the books, but sometimes about their life, just anecdotes. And so I love watching people like that as authors. Have you got any authors that you think are doing it really well and that you love watching?
Yes, so because it's so interesting, and this is why BookTok is, I think, such an interesting case study, because I never see videos of Tessa Bailey on my For You page.
Well, I
She
don't
never pops up.
anymore, actually. It's funny, but as I said, I haven't really been on there much, and I was actually
Mhm.
I was wondering if she, like, I think, and this could be complete speculation because, as I said, I haven't been on TikTok enough really to know. But I used to see it when I was on kind of a lot, and I do read contemporary romance and stuff, so that could be, you know, like why. But I also think she was very good at posting quite frequently for a while, and but then she almost you almost get to a point where you don't actually need to. Similar to Colleen Hoover. I mean, that's just a whole other, you know,
Mhm.
realm what happened to her. But you know, her initial stuff on TikTok and that before, I mean, she was always popular, but before it went crazy popular, she was just doing funny skits with her kids and, like, you know, just living her life. And that, yet as soon as it got big, she actually didn't then need to do anymore. So Tessa may not actually do as much as she used to, I think, because she doesn't need to. But yeah, who do you love? Tell us.
I think Victoria AVR does a great job
Oh yes,
on
she's one of the
TikTok,
ones I was thinking of
because you
too.
can tell she spends so much time on TikTok, and I think that reflects in the content she makes.
Yeah.
Because it's also short, it's easy to read. She has a good kind of mix of, you know, the short little quippy TikToks and the TikToks about her publishing process. So I actually watch quite a few of them, the ones about how she, you know, publishes in the traditional published space and things. She, I think, does a great job, and she's honestly probably my
I
top
follow her. She's great. Yeah.
author that I think is doing the best stuff on the app. And I always think of I can never remember her last name, which sounds bad. Lauren Roberts, who wrote Powerless, the current big YA fantasy series. Because I remember seeing her TikToks back when she had a couple thousand followers, of her being like, you know, this is something I might want to write. Like, what do you guys think? And people were like, write it. And then, you know, she did. And then the rest is history. And I think she's done a really great job of mobilizing her followers and creating really interesting content that related to the book she wrote. And that I think is why, I mean, her book is now selling very well here, but there was a period where it kind of didn't. It took a while for it to pick up. But yeah, she, I think, does a great job on the app.
Excellent, thank you. And what about your favorite TikTok books?
Well, so I read mainly romance and fantasy books.
Yeah.
My favorite fantasy series is the Poppy War Saga by R.F. Kuang.
Yeah.
It is my all-time favorite. And then my favorite romance books tend to be from Ali Hazelwood. My top is The Love Hypothesis.
Does Hachette publish Ali
We
Hazelwood?
do, yes.
You know what? You want to hear something really funny? Has she got a book coming out soon, or?
She does, Deep End.
Yeah,
Formerly called Wet.
I like, because she had one not too long ago, hey, as well. Because the reason is last night I was reading my book in bed, and my son, who's 20, comes in and he goes, "Have you got the new Ali Hazelwood?" And I was like, "Does Meg want to know?" Because Meg's his girlfriend and she loves. And I was like, "No, sorry." And then I was trying to look out, does she mean like the last one or the one that's coming out? So I was like, "Hey, can you get me an advanced copy of the next one? Because then I'll be like the best mother-in-law ever."
I don't know if we'll have advances of that, but Claudia will know more than I do.
I think it's still a talk in progress. But that's the thing I like about Ali. She always has another book.
Yeah.
So like
That's a good tip too, isn't
you
it?
would have just finished one, and then 6 months later there's another.
Well, she because I don't really.
That's what I was wondering. Is she on TikTok?
I think she is, but the video she posts are very like, she'll post a video when she has like a book announcement, and then that's kind of it. She doesn't post that much.
Yeah.
She got a book every 6 months at the moment. That's a reasonable kind of pace.
Yeah.
I think it's almost 6 months. I think this one there's a break. I think it's 8 months, but it's pretty.
I noticed because I was looking at, she also has a little Christmas novella or something, or Amazon shorts coming out.
Yeah. She's a machine, much like you, Rachel. Machines, like.
Except she's got a whole load more sales than me.
American. I mean, that's a big part of it. Like this is a hobby horse thing that I get on about Australians and preferring culture from the Northern Hemisphere over and over again, just because of the way we're trained, essentially. And it happens in music, it happens in films, happens in books, where we do tend to default to books from authors from overseas. And you know, we can all do it. But
I guess, I mean, I read probably a lot now. I read is from overseas too, and I think it is because of the hype. I mean, I do try and read Australian fiction, and I read people I know and different stuff too. It's hard. It is hard to be seen coming in Australia when you are, you know, there's the big books are all the ones that come from overseas, and it's very hard. You know, we have a few exceptions like Jane Harper and Leon Moriarty and that, but Yeah, although to be honest, to saying that then, like as I've said before, to me, the be all and end all is not being published in the US. The be all and end all is growing here.
Mm.
And I guess that's why I just, I think I maybe it's also reading preferences. Like I like reading Australian stuff, but I also feel like it's my own experience and I'm more like, it's like closer to what I'm writing and stuff like that. And, yesterday we talked to Rachael Treasure, sorry, Claudia, and, she said she doesn't read fiction when she
Writing,
is
yeah.
writing. And I think that's maybe what I'm more kind of getting at. Like I find reading Australian fiction is a lot more closer to what I'm writing. And it makes me worry a little bit more that I'm going to be, similar or whatever. Whereas when I read, US or UK fiction or translations that are from other countries, it's not like my experience. So I feel less, it's hard to, you know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm not going to take that on or,
Yeah. I think it's also the amount of competitor titles is smaller from Australian writers. So now partly that is due to bookseller behavior in the past, and this is about fantasy as well. So we have a lot of people who submit fantasy novels. It's always been the case. When I was an agent looking at submissions, I think there are more people submitting fantasy novels than there are buying them, and that's why we have this issue. But the real problem we had was around the time that Angus and Robertson and Borders disappeared was when fantasy publishing stopped in Australia, because the booksellers weren't there to take the fantasy books. Now, romance novels, the Harlequin, Mills and Boon novels have been out in the DDSs for a long time, so Big W came out Target, but a lot of other bookshops weren't stocking romance, obviously because people weren't coming in and asking for it necessarily, but there's correlation there also, not just size of market, but just what's been available in the book selling environment, because we did not have Amazon here as they did in the United States selling romance. And also Harlequin for a long time has sold directly to readers. So Harlequin also was, they
were bypassing the actual store. Things like that.
Yeah, so Harlequin and this is probably getting back to the idea of publisher brand is, Harlequin, Mills and Boon was great at establishing a publisher brand. They were great at turning readers into writers, also great at selling direct to readers, so that it didn't matter if bookshops weren't stocking what they were putting out. Readers knew they could go to Harlequin, Mills and Boon and get their romance novels. So what we have now in Australia is that we have had bookshops that for a long time weren't stocking romance and fantasy.
They now are.
BookTok took them by surprise. I mean, Claudia and I know this. We work in publishing. BookTok took everyone by surprise. The stock was not there. These books, and then everyone was scrambling. And now what we probably have is a lag amongst Australian writing, which causes a lag in Australian publishing to do with romance.
With that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, Claudia. I don't know if you want to say anything on that, but
no, I do agree. I also think, say specifically with BookTok, the books that were kind of talked about when I suppose it blew up for publishing, there were only a couple, but now there are so many. There are so many books. And so it's a lot, I think, harder for, say, stores to keep up or booksellers to know what to actually buy and sell, because there is so many more. And we're receiving more stock of them, I suppose. So it's kind of harder to figure out which ones to get
and probably
behind.
Harder for a book to actually go to the top of the, and become, because there's so many more being discussed. There's
I argue it's impossible.
Which is kind of good, because it's like not going to be one or two books just, canonizing the market kind of thing, but people actually finding good books out there. I think one of the other things I think that possibly Australian romance has struggled with for years, and this is me writing rural and now writing, sort of in the rom-com genre, is that Australian rural romance was marketed as romance here, but as someone who'd read a lot of overseas romance, many of the rural romance books weren't romance enough. Right. So that's one of the reasons why I think they weren't necessarily resonating with the diehard romance readers. They're resonating with Australian readers who are happy to, who have, apart from there's heaps and heaps of romance readers that, as you said, we're getting direct or buying from overseas or reading on their Kindles or whatever. But the sort of general, I think, Big W readers of the past were not necessarily trained in, they weren't romance diehard readers. So they were okay with rural romance and stuff with, romantic elements really. But when a diehard romance reader picked up some of the rural romance, they were like, what? This is not really a romance, Whereas I think, I was kind of closer to the romance element rather than the farmy element, which,
Right.
you know, yeah, anyway, it's
And you can, you know, you have crossed over into some contemporary women's fiction, which also has a bit of romance in, but is, yeah.
I think, yeah. So I do think it depends on where your reading tastes are, and where you can find books and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, this is very fascinating to hear you talk about your time on BookTok.
And Claudia, one thing I would like to ask you about is reader behavior and your own reader behavior. In that books you found on BookTok, it sounds like you ordered them in print. And partly what I find so interesting about BookTok is that one would think that if you're finding the books in a digital environment, you would then go to an audio or an ebook. And certainly there's a bit of that, but so many people want the print artifact. So for you, as someone who's found books on BookTok and in fact come back to reading through BookTok, was print your first thing? You're like, oh yeah, I want to get that physical artifact.
Yeah. I wanted something to hold. I wanted it was also the element of like nostalgia. I wanted to feel like I did when I was like 12 reading lots of books.
Yeah.
But then it also became a fact of like, I had to have an object to hold in a video I was making.
Yes.
Like I had to hold the book. And I think over time, the last, say, 4 years, that's escalated to this whole special edition craze. You had to have something nicer than everyone else to stand out. And that's kind of what's now filtered through to our standard paperbacks that are getting nicer, more specky. And just the general influx of hardcovers. Like it really truly became about the book as object and the book as something good to look at. Now so much it doesn't bother me. I usually just put a picture of the book because I don't have as many paperbacks anymore. I don't have as many coming through because I'm not reading as much. But it was also just, I think it's also coincides with the cost of living kind of crisis. I am not able to buy that paperback. So now it's much more considered. I have to be very much like, I will love that book, otherwise I'm not going to buy a paperback. And I think that is filtering through everyone else at one as well. But no, I have a lot of books. I'm the collector that we were talking about just before. I have like, I think my record is like 10 different editions of a book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am
I've joined you. I just bought the beautiful special edition of Beach Read, the hardcover that just came out. I've already got a hardcover of Beach Read, which was a book of the month one that I ordered somehow through overseas, and I've got the paperback, and I listened to it originally on audio. So yeah.
Well, so the thing, you have to have them all, like.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If they bring a pretty cover out, same with Bridget Jones, I've got like a few editions of that too. It's like if you really love a book and then they bring a new nice cover out, it's like, gotta have that.
Yeah, it's purely book as object. You're like, oh, it's a nicer version. Oh, it's going to be even better than my standard paperback. But I do think I've now almost reverted, and now I'm like, I'd rather just have a paperback because I can't afford the special edition. Or if I'm buying a special edition, it has to be my all-time favorite. Otherwise, I'm just not going to bother. And I do think that's going to start to filter through as everyone else suffers more from cost of living. But yeah, and I suppose now more people on TikTok are reading more ebooks and audio, so it's not as necessary.
More of a norm kind of thing.
It's not. Yes, it's not as necessary to hold your paperback anymore. Like you can just have a picture of the book, because
what I want to know
read.
is these people that are making huge amounts of bookish content, how are they actually finding time to read books?
Well, for me, it was all during lockdown. I was reading, one of the years of lockdown, I read 180 books.
Yeah.
In the year of 1 year.
You made plenty of content during that time too.
Yeah, because it was all, oh my God, I needed to read another book to have new content.
Yeah.
Whereas my perspective has shifted now because I'm not reading as much. So I have to be a bit more creative with how I'm making videos because I'm not reading as much. But the big BookTok creators now actually do it full time. That's why they have enough time. But there's not many in Australia.
They're getting paid for that.
Yeah, they have more, like a lot more brand partnerships coming through. They're able to do it full time. That's not the case for lots of people, and it's still very US focused. I mean, majority of BookTok is based in the US. Majority of my followers are based in the US.
Which is why we're seeing it hard for Australian books to, break through on the shelves, because the people that the content is about those US books, isn't it?
And you could mobilize every single Australian BookToker to post about your book, but it's still not as many as if you did the same in the US. So it's just a lot harder to break through. Basically, I don't know. I'm basically in a reading slump.
Do you still post your own videos and stuff quite a lot, or are you mostly on your job?
Not as much now. I'm finding it a lot harder to find time, and I'm not reading as much. I find it easier when I'm reading more. Like
Yeah.
last month I read heaps. I read like 11 books, unheard of for me recently, and I posted a lot that month. This month I have read nothing. So there's like nothing coming through. So I'm not very in the mood to make a video. It's very dependent on what I'm reading.
Why you said mood too, like I find that is huge. Like when I was posting on TikTok quite a lot, I would batch things up and, you know, change my top and you know, change my earrings and do a few of the same day and stuff. But then I kind of just got like tired of that. Or I'm not in the mood at the moment to do it. So it is so much dependent on your emotions.
It's a hungry beast. That TikTok in particular, in terms of content, is a hungry beast. You know, you've got to keep doing a lot of it, and it is hard to come up with different ideas. And yes, if you're making BookTok content, you've got to be reading the books. And as we know, Claudia, you're actually doing your job in a lot of your spare time by looking at social media to keep up with the community. So that's where your reading time's going.
Yeah. I just don't have time. Like lockdown, I had so much more time. But now I have far less time. So it's much more, I have to be more careful about what I'm reading, and I have to find time to post. I still enjoy it. I go through phases. I still enjoy it, but it's just hard.
Do you think also the more you post though, I know that when I was posting regularly, like, and it's a bit like this now, my new craze is Substack instead of, right? And the more you do something, the more you think of ideas to do that thing. So like when I was doing lots of TikTok videos, I would see opportunities sort of in the day. I'd be like, oh, that would make a good TikTok, or I'd think about something and think, oh, that I could do that on TikTok. Whereas now that I'm not kind of in that world all the time too, I'm not thinking, oh, that would make a good video. I'm now thinking, oh, that's something I could write about on Substack. So the more you do something, or the more you're involved in it, or immerse yourself in it, that, you know, it's easier to come up with content, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, even if I'm just scrolling the For You page, a lot of it's not book content anymore. A lot of it is just other various forms of TikTok stuff. It's not actually much books. A lot of the book content I consume is now through work, and when I am busy on the work social channels. So like, I'm not as involved in what people are talking about because it's not on my personal For You page. So because but then the content now is far more generic than it was. It's books, you know, these are 3 books I loved versus 3 books I hate. And it's like, it's all generic. The whole app is generic.
So do you find it less, so are you less enamored with TikTok or BookTok than you sort of were?
I still love the community that is built there, and I love the books they talk about. Like I've most of the books I've read, if not all the books I've read in the last, say, 4 years, I got from recommendations on BookTok, and I have enjoyed most of them. So for me, I will always quite love the app and what people talk about and how they interact with books. I think it's overall very positive. Generally, I sometimes just get a bit fatigued. I was
gonna say, so does it, like you said, there's a lot more generic stuff, but does that matter? Or are you you're okay to, like, you're happy, you don't necessarily need a BookToker to be really original in the way that they present something, or it's more
am I in the right headspace to be consuming this content? Can I be bothered? And sometimes I cannot be bothered. I'm like, actually, I don't want to talk about a book. I will just scroll past you and wait till someone else talks about another book. So and plus there's just so many more people making videos now, which I think is a good thing, because it means your For You page is not the same 2 people talking about a book they've read. It's far more the same 2 books. It's far more interesting, and you can get some really good recommendations on it if you follow kind of the right people that you're interested in. So I also think that's been a big shift in BookTok as a whole. It's just harder to kind of find your community that you want to be in. But then once you do, it's a great time, but you just kind of have to find those people.
Asking you to be a psychic, do you think BookTok will still be around 5-10 years? And
no, I don't think so. I think TikTok will collapse, I would say, within the next 3 years, and there'll be some other app that comes up that people will migrate to, and then it will be the exact same thing, just in a completely different platform. I don't think TikTok's a permanent thing. I enjoy it, but just the general cycle of media and things, I just don't think it will. I think something else will come up that's more interesting.
Do you think Instagram will last longer then?
Sometimes I love an Instagram reel. I don't think the content is very good on Instagram reels, but sometimes
Okay.
it's nice to have the break. TikTok is so
Yeah.
hyper specific to what you want to watch, whereas reels just it's such random content. So the book content you get, you actually see more of your who you're following's content on Instagram, as opposed to TikTok. I can follow 100 people. I could never see any
They
of their
might not
videos.
see them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the algorithm is so different on each platform. But I do like short form content. I do think short form content is unfortunately here to stay. It ruined everyone's attention span. But it is what led to the sense of community on BookTok. Like when you look at YouTube, that just didn't have that same sense of community. Like I loved booktubers, but I was not engaging with them in the same way. I was not reading their books as much. It was just harder to communicate with them. But on TikTok, you have no barrier.
By short form, do you mean like a minute and under, or are you talking like the 50? Because TikTok was originally 15 seconds.
It was 15 seconds. It was hard to make a TikTok. Like you had no seconds to spare. Like, but now it's like, oh, there's so much time. But just short form.
Do you think it's 15 seconds now? Or like it's just a minute? Like a minute is short form.
I would say about a minute. And then but I suppose
But how long do you have to, like, people will scroll past so quick, won't they? So like
so the average watch time for my videos, and I tend to post long videos, the average watch time is something like 3 seconds. So like no one's actually takes a small percentage of people to watch the full video because they're just like, oh, you're talking for too long, I'm sick of you. Like that's, I also think, something TikTok has had rather than YouTube didn't. YouTube didn't have that ease of switching. TikTok does. So while I think community is stronger on TikTok, it's harder to resonate with people on TikTok because you're not spending as much time with them.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating.
Look, because I haven't spent much time on Pinterest, but I'm actually there's something I keep thinking. I think I want to be back on Pinterest doing things. I'm not sure what, but because Pinterest is this massive search engine, really. It's a bit like TikTok is a search engine, so is YouTube, but Pinterest is something like the third biggest search engine in the world.
Yeah,
and I
do have a Pinterest.
Yeah,
I've never used my Pinterest in terms of like a promotional platform. I have Pinterest, and I have a couple of boards like home stuff, just if I ever get around to renovating my house, all that. But I've also got, for every book I've written, mostly I do a Pinterest, and I'm trying to remember if I've done one for my latest book.
Yeah, I do a board for every book.
Yeah, and I like the quotes that you can find often on there, like as well as like pictures and things, the quote that can really resonate with an actual book or something. So yeah, it's interesting because Pinterest is one of those platforms that has been around a long time, but it's an undervalued platform probably. Yeah,
maybe that's where people are going. Maybe, Claudia, it's not a new platform that people will leave TikTok for. It's an old platform. It's Pinterest.
Well, who knows?
Like Pinterest doesn't feel as interactive.
It's not.
It's not, no.
And I think what the whole community aspect that you said of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, like that's just not there on Pinterest. Whereas this one, I think Substack is trying to like do that. There's a community you can comment and like and share. You can have group chats and things like that. But yeah, Pinterest doesn't have that. So maybe that's why it's never, it's more like a loner's platform where you just can share your things and I mean, like you can scroll and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like,
no, it's just a great way to put it, a loner's.
I love being alone with my own company sometimes rather than other people's. But you know what I mean? Like it's just you can share your board with someone and people can look at it and that, but it's not at interactive platform.
The interesting thing though about Pinterest is like Ashet stopped posting on Pinterest quite a while ago, but there's still thousands of monthly views on pins that are many years old. So I do find that interesting about Pinterest, that content seems to be evergreen for some reason.
Yeah, no, maybe
Claudia wasn't even around. I think when we were posting on Pinterest.
Like, there's a Pinterest platform.
It was before my time. But we've been advertising more on Pinterest now, and we're getting decent results. So like there are definitely people searching for books on Pinterest, but Hachette posted far beyond prior to me.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's really...
maybe time to bring it back because Claudia, you don't have enough to do. I just want to point that out.
I know. I need something else to apply my time to.
I also want to point out that because publishing traditionally has gone through booksellers to reach the public. Apart from Harlequin, Mills and Boon, as I mentioned, what we haven't had in place is those relationships direct with readers. But as you and I have talked about, Claudia, that is something that is needed. And in fact, you are the person, I would suggest, within Hachette who has the most interaction with readers, because you're running the community, you're checking the social media accounts. So does that, I mean, have we left you out there on your own, I guess is what I'm saying? It's you and the public.
No, I enjoy talking to them. But I suppose, like, from me, and even me buying books, like, I suppose, what am I trying to say? Well, I suppose the discussion becomes, where do I go if I need to buy a book? And I go to wherever it's cheapest or most easily accessible.
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah.
And so it's just,
we all got cost of, I thought I just deleted everyone, but no, are you still there? I'm accidentally.
What were you saying?
Oh, I was just basically commenting on, like, for me as a reader trying to find a book to read and who I engage with. Like, I suppose I had a lot of BookTok bypasses the bookseller in a sense. I see a recommendation, I can just go buy it either directly from Amazon. I can walk into Big W. Even if I walk into Dimmicks, like, I can just go straight to the book. I don't actually have to engage.
To the bookseller.
No, I don't have to engage with the bookseller at all.
Or anything.
No, I wouldn't ask a bookseller for a recommendation because I've got my recommendation. I just need to find the book. So I would ask them, hey, do you have this book? And then maybe we'll have a discussion on the book. But I suppose they're not my first point of contact. And I think a lot of this audience, the BookTok audience, it's the same.
Yeah.
Like, I think they would trust someone that they have repeatedly talked to on the internet more than a physical person in a bookstore. Because they're just more familiar with one than the other.
Yeah.
And whereas we said a couple of weeks ago that, you know, social media wasn't a place for authors, you know, and even author events and stuff. It was basically the newspapers and, you know, magazines where people would find their books. I guess it's the same in terms of bookshops. Like, that was originally, once upon a time, that was literally the only place where people could go in and get a book. But now there's so many other options.
Yeah. I think bookstores are doing a good job of keeping up with it. Like, a lot of more bookstores are now on social media. They're making their own TikTok content. And so they're joining the conversation of recommending books in the place where people, and libraries are doing a great
libraries
job
on TikTok.
So, like, they are evolving to kind of meet the needs of this specific group of book buyers. They're just joining that conversation in a different space in a physical store. So I think that they are doing all the right things to continue to reach these readers. I just think, especially I think, like, a lot of people now are very introverted as well. So if they're walking to a store, they actually don't want to talk to anyone. They just want to go find their book and leave.
I can tell you, as a former bookseller, that's long been the case. And I like to say that in a general
book readers, we like our own company.
In a general bookshop, people, like, as in not specifically children's bookshop is different, but in a general bookshop, most people don't want the bookseller to talk to them until they want the bookseller to intuit when they need help. And that bookseller needs to be available.
Or when they ask. It's like any shop, though. Like, if I walk into a clothes shop, I want the person to talk to me, because then it makes me feel very self-conscious and kind of aware. I just want to look at the stuff, and if I have a question, then I will find something to ask. I do not need to come up and ask me if I need help. No.
Also, because I suppose looking at BookTok, like, I feel like that community that they've created has actually translated into real life. People will go to a bookstore with their friend now, so they won't still talk to a bookseller, but they'll talk to their friend, and they'll have a really big conversation about what to get and what to read, and like that conversation happens on TikTok. So it's just kind of moved into the physical space, which I think is a great thing as well. So I think there are signs that BookTok has, I mean, obviously there's signs it's greatly influenced how people are buying books, but I think it's curious to see how those same elements and discussions do happen in real life. It's not just specific to the app. Like, it has filtered through, basically.
Well, Claudia, we've had you talking for quite a while. It is a Sunday afternoon when we're speaking, and you're not technically at work, but you are basically, you've just done some work here. So thank you very much for your time. We will let you go. So
really appreciate it. Thanks.
Before we started recording, I didn't give you the spiel about how I'm going to do an official wind up, and then I'll pause recording. So this is me breaking the fourth wall here to our listeners and watchers, saying, I'm telling Claudia now I'm about to stop recording, and then she can leave. And then Rachel and I will do our outro. So Claudia, thank you so much for your time. I'm about to pause recording.
No, thank you so much for having me. Sorry for rambling so much.
You didn't.
No, it was no rambling.
Talking to the queen of rambling. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Bye.
So well,
what do you I was going to say that was such an interesting
Oh.
conversation with Claudia. I love working with her. Every time I go to her with an idea for something, whether it's for an author or our own TikTok, whatever, she's always so receptive, so proactive. And yeah, we asked her to do this today, and she immediately said yes. So, but what are you up to right now, Rach?
Lots of notes. I really think the big takeaway, and I didn't even talk about with her because I'm reading The Simple Wild, which I know was a big book that you know, I was on TikTok, and because we were going to talk about TikTok before I started today, I went onto TikTok and searched like The Simple Wild, and what Claudia said about how they'll feel is 100% true. You know, you see the people just swooning over the relationships and laughing and crying and saying, oh, this made me feel so, you know, happy, and I had to it's not like about the plot. And in fact, what people were saying about that book was there isn't really much plot. And you know that I'm quite a fan of what we're calling, well, I called quiet novel, but I heard the other day called the plotless novel. So I think if you can make people feel stuff, then yeah, that was my big takeaway from that. I'm still not sure how much more I'll dip into TikTok myself as an author, but you know,
how are you feeling about Pinterest now?
Oh, well, I've just been on Pinterest like while we were just wrapping up there, and I would definitely love to find an author who's, you know, there's so much book content on there. I just looked up romance books, and you know, there's heaps and heaps of bookish content, as you said, like here, but a lot of them are links to articles, rather than actually. So a lot of the content takes you away from Pinterest, to a newspaper, an online magazine, or someone's blog, or things like that. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting platform. As I said, I've never really thought about it as a promotional platform. I enjoy it as a brainstorming tool, and you know that those boards that I've done for brainstorming are available for any readers to look at. So yeah, who knows? Maybe you've predicted that that's the next big thing again.
We'll see. But I think we've given hopefully some listeners / watchers food for thought with social media in general, with TikTok. If anyone has any comments or questions, please drop them below or around, or send us a message or a DM or whatever. We're always happy to have your feedback.
Thank you, and have fun whatever you're doing this week, everyone, and happy reading and writing.
And to you too, Rachel. See ya.
See ya.